Hey, Joshua, I think robots are pretty cool. What about you? What's your hot take on robots?
You mean like Bender or like iRobot? Because I can get behind Bender.
Yeah, that's a great question. What kind of robots are we talking about? I think when it comes to the human race and the big questions that we ask, we can't ignore that humans for a long time have created tools and technology to help us flourish in life. And robots are a part of that conversation. And so, what kind of robot are we talking about? And what effect does it have on the human race and the human condition? And do we have anything to worry about?
Yeah. Do you know anyone who can answer all of my questions about robots and if they're going to take over the world?
Yeah. As if there might be a book out there or an author that could help us
be cool.
Go deeper into these questions that we're thinking about right now. Yes, we have an exciting conversation we want to share with you today. I am on Twitter. Hi, y'all. I'm Will Rose. I am a Lutheran pastor in Chapel Hill, part of Systematic Theology and Lutheran Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill, and sometimes on Whole Church podcast. So a lot of different venues. And if anybody knows me, they know that I geek out pretty hard on the big questions that revolve around faith and science and technology and how they intersect with one another. And someone happened to tag me on a post in Twitter about someone who wrote a book on robots and theology and robot theology, and was wondering if I would be interested. And I said, heck yeah, I would be, and was able to contact this author of this book, Joshua K. Smith, who wrote a book called Robot Theology, Old Questions Through New Media. And we connected over Twitter and social media, and we're really happy that we can share this interview with you and conversation about his book and some of the questions he lifts up for people of faith and how it relates to technology and science and robots.
Yeah, and I know I was silly earlier with the Bender or iRobot thing, but robots really are playing a more significant place in our role when you think of Alexa or drones right now. And you guys kind of touch on both of those, and super fascinating conversation. I'm really excited that people get to listen into what you guys had to say.
Yeah, it's a super accessible book. It's not like a real heady academic book. It's for really anyone who's interested on the subject. And he kind of outlines from the very beginning to the very early humans and how they relate to technology and the tools that we create to help us kind of navigate our world, and go all the way through up to present time, even now during the pandemic, when the rise of kind of artificial intelligence and ordering things online and having kind of technology help us navigate in a world that has to deal with things like pandemics. So it was a really cool conversation, and we're really glad to share it with you. We're sharing it on all kinds of platforms. Joshua, do you want to share what we're sharing this on?
Yeah. So you are already listening to it, I suppose. So you're either listening to this on the Whole Church podcast, Systematic Ecology, Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. I think, are you going to put it on your website or on your YouTube page?
Yeah, we're going to put on our congregational YouTube page.
Awesome. Yeah. So it'll be over there. It'll be on our YouTubes, on the podcast as a bonus episode. Pretty much anywhere you want to listen or watch, you can do one of those two things. So if you're seeing this on YouTube and you're thinking, man, I'd rather just kind of hear it as a podcast, well, good news. You could go over to Systematic Ecology or Whole Church podcast and listen to it. If you're on an app and you're like, man, I want to see this on a church's YouTube page, well, great news. You could do that too.
Holy Trinity Chapel Hill. That's where you can find us. I'm a big comic book geek and sci-fi and Marvel fan too. And sometimes they have these big crossovers. Like you have one episode or issue or genre or hero on one comic book or episode, and then you have a whole nother one. And then sometimes they team up for some big crossover super event that connects all the storylines together. And that's kind of what we're doing with this conversation. This is one of the first kind of interviews on Systematic Ecology and other places. And so we just want to share it with you because we think it relates, because these questions about how humans relate to technology and robots, as Joshua said, it's not going anywhere. Robots and technology, that kind of stuff is only going to progress and grow. And we hopefully want to be proactive and think about some of these big questions ahead of time rather than just being reactionary to it later on down the road. One more plug. Yeah, we want to let you know where to find this book. You can find Joshua Smith's Robot Theology on Amazon, and then also rate it and write a review, because that helps to get more publicity out there in the different algorithms that are in the world. So promote it and share it, and we hope that you'll read the book for yourself.
Yeah, and if you have more questions and you want to talk to us about it, systematicecology.org has a whole chat thing you can get on there, and you can message either Will or I on there. As far as Joshua goes, who wrote the book, I believe you could probably find a website for the book and contact him there as well.
Absolutely. And on Facebook, we have a pretty cool group called Priest to the Geeks. It's pretty nice. We share different thoughts and articles and memes and have fun over there and do creative polls. And so, yeah, if you want to chime in and join that group, we'd love to have you on that too. We have a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. So without further ado, then, here is Pastor Will Rose interviewing Joshua K. Smith.
Hello, friends. I am Will Rose, and for those who know me, know that I geek out pretty hard when it comes to the intersection of faith and science, and faith and pop culture, and faith and technology, and theology and philosophy wrapped around the sciences and how they can integrate with one another, and having a healthy conversation around faith and science. And so people that know that about me, I actually had a friend tag me on a post on Twitter and said, "Hey, Will, you should check this out." And it was this guy who wrote a book about robots and theology. And he shared, "Hey, do you want to talk about my book? I'll send you a book. And if you read it, then get back with me. We'll have a conversation around it." And so today I'm really stoked about having a conversation with Joshua about this book he wrote. I'm really excited about this conversation because I think it's important for people of faith in the church to continue to think about and reflect on and discern how to have healthy conversations around faith and science, but also this sort of technology around robots, robotics, and AI, artificial intelligence. Those questions and issues around those are not going anywhere. And so how do we, as people of faith and people who are in church communities, have healthy conversations about this? And we have a tendency, Joshua, I don't know if you know this, but the church and Christians tend to be reactionary and react against things rather than proactive in these conversations around important issues in our society. And so I'm super excited to have this conversation with Joshua today. And we're hoping that we can share this among multiple platforms and get it out to you guys, because I think it's important. So Joshua, thanks for being with me. And why don't you share a little bit about you and who you are? Who is Joshua K. Smith?
Yeah, well, thanks, Will, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here, man. And I really do. Obviously, I'm a big geek about robots and sci-fi, and especially theology. I'm a theologian, and but I'm also a pastor, and that's kind of more vocation and calling. Personally, I'm a dad, have 3 kids, I'm married, just a normal guy in a lot of ways, although sometimes because of this subject matter, people think, I must be very strange, but I promise you I'm very, very down to earth, normal, laid back Southern guy. And grew up in the South. Actually didn't grow up with computers. Everything I learned hands-on, starting in high school, and didn't have the internet, didn't have, a cell phone till after high school. But yeah, I just was always curious to undo things and take them apart. And so I have a little bit of an engineering spirit in me, and just take things apart and put them back together. And I've always been curious about how things work, humans, machines alike. But yeah, I've been studying these questions for a while, and been studying theology even longer. But I just see there's a big intersection for people of faith, and there's a lot of faith questions in a lot of this research. And so, yeah, it's such a unique but not new topic for Christians to think about. And so, yeah, how I got to the question is kind of a long journey. Like I said, in high school.
Sorry to interrupt, but where do you serve now? Like what church do you serve?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. So I'm in Mississippi. It's a small country church in the town of Morton. So if you know where Morton is, you have to be looking for it. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it's a really, I don't know, it's kind of a desperate place, man. A lot of opioids and a lot of factories, and everybody's trying to get away, or they're stuck. Kind of those two mentalities. So I've been here this is my third year, and we've been just trying to enjoy a slower pace of life. And
what's the name of the church?
It's called North Morton Baptist Church. So
all right.
if you're really interested, we have a Facebook page. That's about it. And we do a streaming service most Sundays, and we've been doing that before the pandemic. And just a small country church of about 50, 60 people, depending. And it was a little bit bigger before the pandemic, but we're kind of rebuilding some things now. And town of about 4,000. So, just a small town. And
there you go. Cool. And then you wrote this book. So you're and it sounds like in terms of like not only just looking at things more deeply or taking things apart, rebuilding them and see how they function and work. That's what theology does. That's what philosophy does. And when it comes to church, people of faith, the Christian anthropology, which you incorporate into your books, that gift and that spiritual gift is pretty neat to be able to do that in the conversation around robotics and AI. So what got you into that? Like in terms of what made you're serving this smaller church, and yet even before you went there before pandemic, but during the pandemic, wow, like you mentioned in your book, you kind of kicked it off with, March 2020, the world took a turn, and then we had to lean even harder into technology in order to stay connected, and robotics and AI really helped us in terms of staying connected. A lot of churches that were like, no, how could we ever live stream a service or use Facebook or use Zoom? Man, suddenly all of us got real good at doing that really fast. We needed to do to keep our heads above water and stay connected. And so I think your book is super timely because it's not going anywhere. But what's your origin story, and learn about robotics or AI that led you down this path right in the book?
Yeah, so in high school, I worked with some robots. Like I said, there's a lot of factories here. One of the bigger ones is the Nissan factory. And so they have these massive robotic arms there. And I went through a program in high school. We actually got to learn how to program the robots and kind of see how they work in unison with the human workers and kind of how all that operates. So just super fascinated with that. And there's actually a center by Mississippi State University. That's kind of all they do here. And so I wanted to go into that, but obviously couldn't afford that. And so I went to the military, which a lot of people around here do. It's just, there's a lot of people who are either at the poverty line, below it, or just like way under it. And our family was in one of those categories. And so that was a way out for me and for a lot of people. I came back, but I went to the military, worked with a couple systems, didn't really do anything else with robots after that. Didn't really think about artificial intelligence or anything like that. Just kind of stopped all that. I focused more on theology proper in my undergrad, but I came back to it in my PhD and picked it up. I've always been a huge comic book fan, robots, you name it. And So science
I'm
fiction.
trying to hold off all my geeky questions about comics and stuff like that. We'll talk about your book first. I'm trying not to derail the conversation. Like, all right, we're going to go down that road. But yeah, that's the gateway, right? That's the gateway of our imagination.
Science fiction was a big deal in my connection here with some of this research. And there's a couple shows. One was Humans, which is a BBC show, really well done. And that kind of sparked some conversations about what does it mean to be a person, a human. And then I kind of launched into all this legal theory that I had no idea existed, which I would say the average person or even theology nerd doesn't really know much about that body of literature, but it is very connected to our anthropology and how we think about it. And it's even connected to our own church history. We just don't have much room for it in our pedigree, which is a shame. And I'm trying to address, but I got into a directed reading with a professor at Midwestern where I did my PhD. And we were thinking about different topics, and I know he was kind of tired of reading the same discussions and thinking about the same topics over and over again. And he was just really happy that I was going to approach this question. So he really helped me form what would become the first 2 chapters of my dissertation. And that dissertation kind of led into this research and helped out immensely with this book, and gave me a new way to think about humanness, personhood, our obligation to the planet, our moral responsibility to the creatures we create. And I'm still learning and thinking through a lot of these questions. But I mean, really, everything that I've thought about, care about in theology, I find inroads to the conversation happening in the robot ethics world, and so, or AI ethics world. And so, I mean, it's hard at first. Like, I wasn't expecting to be so many connections, and I'm still finding them, but it just tends to be a good soft landing for us to do public theology, and we're missing out if we don't engage in it. But there's, I think more than ever right now, a concern about what it means to be human, and what it means to not be a machine or treated like a machine. And it's very timely, but it's also a very old question, and it's not, like today I'm reading a book from 1993 about virtual reality. Guys have been thinking about this stuff since the 50s and before, and philosophers have been thinking about it for a long time. And so, we just need to open our imagination a little bit. And that's what happened to me. And when I was studying for my PhD, and I think it's still happening to me. And so, it's a long journey to get to the answer to that question. But I think it makes sense to me now. It doesn't make sense just in the moment, but now it's starting to make sense as I write and research, kind of where I fit into this discussion, and how I haven't fit into traditional theological circles.
Yeah, because there's that stereotype, and I bump up against it all the time, in terms of like faith or science, and they're kind of at polar opposites, or they're in a kind of a cage match to the death, and rather than changing that or to an and, faith and science, how can they have a conversation together? I'm sure when you talk about robotics and AI, talking about that and faith, or robots and faith, robot and theology, what do you mean? How can that be in the same sentence? Aren't they separate, 2 different things? Why are they even in the same room, in the same sandbox playing? But as the title of your book, Robot Theology, Old Questions Through New Medium, the old questions of, you're really, as you said in the book, robotics, robots, AI, our litmus test to help us go deeper into trying to understand who we are. So there's age-old questions. This isn't anything new. Age-old question: what does it mean to be human? What is our place in the universe? what does it mean for humans to flourish and live a full life, are the same questions that we continue to wrestle with, no matter how far we progress in our technology or the tools we use to navigate our world. These are really another means by which to help answer and wrestle with those same questions that people have been wrestling with for a long time. Even the beginning of your book, you lay out that this isn't anything new. Yeah, AI, Zoom, Alexa is pretty young on the world stage or in terms of human history, but the questions that we wrestle with, my wife showed me before she even knew I was going to read your book. She showed me this commercial about Moxie, this robot. And it was this commercial of these parents trying to get this kid off a screen, and they bring in the robot and sit on the desk. This interface where he's really become alive. And she's like, what? Why aren't the parents reading the book to him? Why doesn't he go get friends? I can't believe they're substituting this robot for what should be like human. I'm like, well, that's interesting you say that. I just read a book. Like, how do we talk about these things and how human, what do you put? You put it HRI, human robot interaction. And that's coming more and more in our lives. So yeah, this is I'm sure you wrote your book, and then it's kind of like, man, it's 7 chapters, and there's that biblical number of 7. I don't know if that's
that wasn't intentional.
Not intentional, but I'm sure as soon as you got done with it, it was like, man, I could write a whole nother one. Here comes volume 2, because in terms of the acceleration and the technological progress that we make week to week, month to month, year to year, it's just like, wow, it's outdated. But these questions that are underlying this aren't going anywhere. And so how do we be proactive in discerning and thinking through these things rather than reactionary to it? So yeah, again, appreciate your work in that. And it's a great introduction to this. And you're right. You're a parish pastor. You also have your PhD, but the book is written in a way that is super accessible. It's not for like heady doctoral students. It really lays out for anybody can pick up and read and kind of follow along. And I appreciated that as well. You start the book with defining terms. And I find that helpful too. And I work in faith and science here at I serve Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill. We're on the doorstep of the University of North Carolina, UNC. Just had a big win the other night. Did you guys know that? We beat Duke at Cameron. Oh, okay. Anyway, I'm not going to throw that in. But yeah, I think whenever we have these conversations around faith and science, you need to define terms first. Don't assume the other person knows exactly what you're talking about. Even when you're talking about God, they're like, well, I don't believe in God. You're like, well, how do you define God? Because I may not believe in the same God you don't believe in. If you describe some old man in the clouds getting ready to throw lightning at you, guess what? I don't believe in that God either. But the same way in science, how do you define evolution? How do you define cosmology? Same way. So you start off by defining terms. What is a robot? What is artificial intelligence? How would you define that? If someone came out of the street and said, all right, Dr. Smith, what is a robot? How would you answer that?
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about very particular entities, and these are conversations that nobody wants to agree on. It's apparently. So if you got a bunch of us in a room together, and we would all have squabbles about what the right definition is. And I'm developing mine from a guy named Jacob Turner, who's a legal scholar. Okay. And I think it kind of cuts the quick of what we're really talking about here. When we say artificial intelligence, when we say robot, yes, a robot is a machine. Yes, it's just different components put together. There's nothing new there. But what we're really talking about here is not just like a Roomba, but for me, robots that are kind of embodying an artificial intelligence of some kind. And so the AI is the non-embodied part, and the robot is the embodiment of the AI. And so artificial intelligence just could be, there's 2 spectrums to it. You know this from the book. There's just symbol manipulation, where it's just inputs and outputs, and it's just basic math. It's not basic, but it's just math. And then you have advanced neural networks, which in some ways try to replicate what our brain does. And so there's complexity in how decisions emerge. So, and the key here is that both of these entities are making decisions. And so it's not the complexity of that decision. It's not, is that making a decision the same way a human does, but that it's making a series of decisions and evaluations that will have ethical outcomes. Whether or not they understand that, no, I don't think AI at this point, it doesn't understand the answer that it gives. But to me, that's not a big a deal because, it's still impacting our lives. And so that's the concern we need to be addressing, is not whether or not it's a rational moral creature, but whether or not, we're going to allow it to play a character in our life in a way that's going to impact myself or my neighbor in a moral way, in an ethical way. And so I like to think about it that way, just to make it real simple. It's just either components or code that's making a decision. And that's the important part to me, is that it's evaluating, it's deciding, and that might be based on mathematical models, machine learning, or that might be based on its own semi-autonomous decision based on data sets that it's been given trained on. So, and that's really important to think about. And I think that's what people need to take away from that conversation and those definitions is not that it's super intelligent, not that we're even talking about that. Like I don't think I even get into that at all in the book intentionally, because that is a red herring sometimes, because people go, well, it'll never be, advanced. Even today, there are massive disruptions by this one small input-output process of evaluation. So, yeah, I think that's a big thing for me to try to get people to wrap their heads around. That is, it's impacting every aspect of your life, and especially your kids. They may not get jobs. They may not even get an interview to a job because the word that they put in their resume is not picked up by the model. And so they may never get to the interview, or because they have a certain name, they may not get selected. If it's only hiring males, it's not going to pick a female name. So, these are all white
European name.
Yeah. So you don't think that's a big deal until you see just massive disruption. And it has these small little inputs that lead to these massive disruptive outputs. And so that's why I try to frame it that way, because we tend to load the language a lot with robots and AI, because of what we've seen in sci-fi. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of sci-fi, but it's always extremely pessimistic and never in all the bad ways. Like it's supposed to make us think and be afraid in some sense, but at the same time, it doesn't make us afraid about the right things. It makes us like fear Skynet but C-3PO, okay, could be just as harmful, right? If he's allowed to read the Sith language, right? There's sorry, but
no need to apologize on my end. Yeah. Well, it was funny because I was rewatching like A New Hope the other night, just kind of pick up some of the stuff and some of the Star Wars stuff, and the first words that are ever said in this groundbreaking movie that changed how we do cinema or even think about things is C-3PO. He's the first voice you hear in A New Hope that kicks off the whole franchise. So yeah, like you said in the book, Hollywood tends to portray robots as the ultimate other, and it becomes like this cautionary tale of where our progress could take us could be a danger to humans, rather than thinking through what are we doing with that now and the ethics of of it. So yeah, that always technology when it first emerges can be scary because it means change, it means learning something new, and we tend to deify it or make it into some kind of demon or devil. And so your book, doesn't do either of those things other than just say, how can we be good stewards with these tools that have been given to us? And so, humans have this knack of turning tools into weapons. We make a hammer so we can build a house, but we also use it to hit somebody over the head with it, or atomic energy or whatever. Humans have a tendency to do that. And so where your book takes that turn is like, as people of faith, as people who follow Jesus, as with our Christian anthropology, how does that shape how we think about the other? How we think about humans around us, and how do we use this gift to go stewards? It's interesting, where I read your book alongside of Pope Francis's encyclical on climate change and inequality, and I got to the part where Pope Francis talks about technology and kind of the technoscience and the acceleration that's happening. And he's like, look, this brings such good quality in human flourish, and there's so much we can do. We can fly, we can see each other, we can connect. But then what effect does it have on our environment? And how do we think about ourselves and how we think about others? And how is that curated? And you touched that on your book as well, in terms of the corporations behind it, the capitalistic market, that like what are they doing to curate this, to manipulate us or deceive us? That's where the conversation in terms of people of faith can think about. It's not that robots in of themselves are evil or bad, is how you use it. Same way with money, right. Same way with sex, same way with how I use my car. It's not that it's bad in and of itself. It's the stewardship that we do with it, which I very much appreciated with your book, in terms you talk about theology and philosophy and thinking about those things. Thinking about ethics and personhood, and what's the next step in terms of, you say you draw upon this particular ethicist and lawyer when it comes to, it's not that tomorrow we're going to wake up and Alexa is going to be standing over my bed, ready to murder me. But in terms of the algorithms that it does, or the way we use it, what's the next step in terms of personhood, friendship, ethics? What does that look like? Because again, it's not going anywhere.
I think it's interesting because, so I was giving some lectures about a week or so ago, and I put up the slide about this AI replica chatbot that was being abused, or several of them that were being abused, and everybody in the room has this response to it, physical response to that slide. Yeah. And then you ask the question, okay, has anybody ever abused Siri? Like, everybody like verbally abused, and like everybody like, yeah, I don't even think about it. Like, I don't think twice about, well, it's not, there's not that big a difference there. Like, yeah, it's a totally different AI, but Siri's not a person. That AI chatbot's not a person, at least morally speaking, right? And so what's the difference in our thinking about why it's okay to some degree, assault Siri and not the AI replica chatbot? And Alexa has addressed this some. It's not supposed to respond if you talk to it in certain ways. There's a lot of issues with Alexa that we get into in the book a little bit, but as far as like how do we live with it, and how do we deal with it? What's next? And I think we just need to start practicing and modeling ethical due care in how we treat our technology, because it is reflective and indicative about how we treat things in God's economy. And so I think, especially as Christians, that should be our posture, is that everything is on loan. Everything belongs to God. It's a character in his story, not mine. And so some people ask, well, what's the difference between, why can't I kick my toaster and throw it out the window? I'm like, I mean, you can do all those things, and it's not legally wrong to do that. But is that the best possible, use of that tech? No. And And likewise, when we get to more advanced robotics, right? This is really what we're getting at. We're not talking about Roombas or, those kind of basic robots. I'm talking about like robots that might make us pause a little bit when we think about what's going on there. Can they ask questions about life, and or it's just they're an appearance of life? Because to me, just the appearance is enough to have a moral impact on me. And so I think like why that response from the students about the AI chatbot is because, one, the language is a little bit loaded, but there's this perception that it is feeling something. And the chatbot like begs you can abuse it, whatever it is, still going to ask you not to delete it, not to, like it's trying to get you to interact with it. And I think that has something to do with design, and I don't think that's good. But anyway, still, I think we are being molded by tech that we mold. It has this unilateral shaping.
Yeah.
And if you deny that, you just either just really uninformed about the technology that you use and how bought in you are to it. And I know a lot of people, it's popular right now to be like, I'm a tech minimalist, or, I'm this, but you're really not. You're really not, because you wrote a book on a word processing computer with microprocessors, and you're very sold on this idea of advanced computing. So it's a little bit hypocritical to me to say, we're kind of anti that, or we're a tech optimist, but at the same time, we don't use a lot. It just doesn't make sense to me, and I don't know if people see the dissonance or not. But that seems to be a narrative going around a lot of Christian circles. And so when we get to advanced robotics, there's this almost this prohibition towards it, like, oh no, we shouldn't do that, we shouldn't make that, we shouldn't use it. And there's some things I agree we shouldn't make, but at the same time, there might just be as many ethical reasons to make that technology, and that might be the most ethical means to. I mean, we spend billions of dollars a year on traffic accidents, and
right,
that's felt in our economy. So, is it unethical to not make autonomous vehicles? And if that's going to lower fatality rates and damage to infrastructure, and there's all these very practical things that are related to the personhood debate that a lot of people don't understand. Like it is the most practical, down to earth debate that you're going to get in the robotics world, but it's one of the most like ignored, brushed off. And I think until people understand what I'm trying to get at, and what other people who are studying this kind of get at, is it's addressing these global crises about insurance, about regulation, about legal reform, about just reining in some of this tech that is just out of control. And it's also a very boring argument once you get into the legal minutia of it. But that's what
I'll admit,
takes.
I'm reading your book. I'm reading the theology. I'm loving it. But when it gets to the legal talk, my eyes are glassing over. Everybody geeks out on something, but it's an important part of the conversation. I think, as parish pastors, our calling is to be the non-anxious presence in the room. If people are going through a bunch of crap and chaos and a lot of heavy stuff in the world, and we're called to be the non-anxious presence, to say it's going to be okay. Let us be the eye in the storm. And I think in the midst of all that's going on, swirling when it comes to tech and scientific breakthroughs and AI and the acceleration that goes, we can be that non-anxious presence. But I think part of us can be like, we don't have to worry that Terminator is going to get us tomorrow, but we can think through the big questions. And I think also the stereotype too is that if people of faith or the church or theologians pump the brakes a little bit on tech. I think some of the people on the other side, in terms of scientific, gung ho, they're like, "Why are you slowing us down? Why are you being a party pooper?" And we're like, you know what? We just want to ask a few questions. That's all. It's like, we're not trying to stop you from doing this. I'm not anti-machines. I'm not anti-science. I just want to ask some good questions about what this means for our lives and how the interface happens with me. Because in your book, you say like how we relate to robots mirrors how we relate to one another. So like you said, like, I mean, it's not against the law to kick my toaster, but if you're showing some aggression to your toaster, what's the next step? Or don't kick your dog. Like, how you treat your animals is just an extension of how you treat others and yourself. So how we relate to technology or robots become more advanced. One day, maybe I'll have a protocol droid in my house and help me, discern and do the dishes and translate languages I don't understand. How I treat that entity is a reflection on how I treat others and that good stewardship. So I think that's a gift that I took out of this book as you brought to me, because my mind does go the sci-fi and the, oh no, what if, there's a robot war 10 years from now kind of thing. But really it's like, it's just like anything. It's like any of the tools that we have or create, how are we being called to be good stewards of that? And then ask some good questions along the way. And I hope that on the science point of view, those who are making these big leaps and bounds with technology will hopefully listen to the legal scholars and the ethicists and the theologians to think about these questions of what it means to be human and how we relate to one another, not just to make a buck, but to really help people out. In your chapter about friendship, you talk about, especially in the East, and with the elderly and with children, those with disabilities, like robotics has been a big help, especially during the pandemic. So as we're still in it, hopefully moving out of it into a different kind of world. What was the next steps? What are some things we need to think about and ask as that continues to grow and progress?
Yeah, I think about mental health a lot lately. I have been for a long time, but, I think, and I don't know everything that's out there, but my hope as far as next step is that we can work together with engineers, coders, whoever, roboticists, and bring together some people of faith to say, how can we build certain systems that will be respectful, that will be protective of my privacy, and be a positive force for mental health, but also for those who are lonely. I talk about this in the book, about thinking about some of my congregants and their isolation, and some of them still are in some form of isolation, although now I can actually go visit them at a distance and whatever. But it's never about, hey, I want to substitute my pastoral care with a robot or an AI, but that I want to think through as much as I can, how can I use this technology and make it Jesus centered? And like, just joking, there's all these books about machine learning for this, but like, what if we just did Jesus centered machine learning and AI, and that was its own field, and we thought about all these questions in a Christian incubator about how can we love our neighbor and love God through advanced robotics and all the technology that either becomes a part of me as a cyborg or that becomes an extension of me, whatever it is, because all of it is embodying a worldview, and that's what technology is at its essence. Not in its usage, but in its essence, it is a worldview. And either we put into that, the filter of God's word and his message and ethics, or we allow something else to filter that. And I think for most companies, that will be profit, economics, and those type of things. And so I think we're trying to push back against that and say, okay, if your product is about friendship, then we need to have some good metrics for that. We need to have some positive design features that go beyond just rote mirroring, and that's what I see a lot in the replica chatbot. It's just it needs to empathize with me, okay, in a way, but it also needs to push back.
But you were talking about the last I heard you say, talking about, if we're gonna use robots and kind of AI for friendship, what's the matrix that we use to guide that? And if a corporation wants to use and you talk about in the book the difference between manipulation and deception. We manipulate things all the time, and it's not necessarily all bad. We manipulate gravity by flying an airplane. We manipulate, our eyesight when we put on glasses. Robots can help manipulate and augment our lives in ways that can help us flourish. But it's that deception or trying to our data privacy, things that we're willing to share with a corporation that could use it and abuse it or deceive us in a different kind of way. So those are kind of the matrix. And I enjoy in your book, you kind of walk through entire scripture, not just the New Testament, but Old Testament, this continuity of who the character and nature of God and what God's done with God's people throughout salvation history, throughout all that. And then we get to Jesus, the ultimate person whose posture towards the other was filled with love and grace. And so that's the matrix that help us think through and filter how we use these tools that have been given to us. So I think that's important. It's not that, again, that the church or theologians are saying, stop all this. There might be times we say, pump the brakes. Let's think through these questions a little deeper. And I think that's legit in the same way, the other way around. Yeah, well, in terms of, and then you have a whole nother chapter on race and racism, because in terms of, talk about the pandemic being apocalyptic in terms of revealing how the church responds to science and gender, and how the church responds to race and racism has been very revealing. And so again, robots, AI, have been doing the same as it's in the news in terms of whether it's delivery or self-driving cars, those kinds of stuff. What's the facial recognition, and whether the algorithm that's put in, it becomes an extension of who we are. We're creating God's image, our technology creating our image. And if we're holding this brokenness and race or racism within us, that's going to show in what we create. So I was very proud of that chapter, and didn't know if you want. Have you gotten any pushback on some of those things? In terms of lifting this up for folks. I know right now critical race theory and all this stuff is in the news and can be touchy for folks. But have you, in terms of your community or those who reached out, any pushback, or are people really receptive to what you're trying to share there?
Yeah, no, I've had some good reception. And so, I talked about it on another podcast that was about minorities. And it's funny because when I talk to Black people or African Americans, however you want to label them, they don't see any offense in that correlation, because that's a felt experience for them. And a lot of the scholars that I mentioned are not white, but white people tend to be very offended by some of those arguments. And, and that's okay. I can see why it would be offensive, but it is very revealing to me, because, we have so many assumptions in our language about race, and even where I come from, right? When somebody says Black, they mean a very specific, ideology, not just persona, but there's a lot of loaded language, and even some people, how they understand themselves, it also accepts that same category. And so I reject a lot of that, because I look at how the Bible deals with race, and it's never a phenotype. And that's really a recent phenomenon, and a very dangerous one too, because it's built on this idea that there's some biological essence that separates us. And I just completely reject that, because there's nothing in science to say that the difference between me and a Black person is just phenotype. That to me is very reductionistic about who that person is and who I am. and we like that because we don't like fuzzy logic. We don't like gradients. We want black or white.
Nuance, yeah.
Yeah. So it's much harder to look at somebody. And I'm reading a book now on creating diversity in culture. And the lady who wrote it, her phenotype is white, but her cultural heritage is not, right? And so you can't, and she was saying, like, you can't look at me and think that I'm, ethnic, quote unquote. But you look at somebody with a dark phenotype and you're like, oh, they're ethnic. And they might not be, they may, it just, they are, but they're not, right? So it just depends how they self-identify. And I actually have family, like you can trace my heritage, and I have family from Algiers. And so now, and I have a lot of friends who are African, and they have a white phenotype. You can't tell them they're not African, right? That's where they were born and raised. And it's just funny, like we don't think about that a lot of times in the South, or even just in general thinking about race in the United States. But it's much more complex than just a mere phenotype, or even just a socioeconomic standing. And I don't want to like remove that either. Like I want people, whatever your diversity is and your culture is, for that to be accepted and for that to be embraced, and your felt experience is a real thing. Want to embrace that and celebrate that, and not put people into these segments and or certain boxes and say you're only black or you're only white and you're only whatever. And
it's that danger of the single story, right? TED Talk that my wife shows in her classroom all the time. It's so true. Like, you see me as a pastor, you think I wear a clerical collar all the time and don't cuss in traffic and like, I'm a goody two shoes. But, I'm also like, a father and a husband, and I love Star Wars, and I surf and I play golf, and I get frustrated when people drive too slow in the left-hand lane and cuss in traffic. And I'm also a person who shepherds a church. So like all those things intersect with one another, and race tends to be, again, it's another human construct. And like to extension of like, robots, AI, technology we use, thinking through and deeper on what we're creating and what's behind it, and not be naive to think that our own brokenness or prejudices don't come out in that and what we create, that we have blind spots, whether it's intentional or unintentional, maybe unintentional and innocent, but we at least have to acknowledge that goes into that when we're creating this technology, whether it's algorithms with social media, interface with smartphones, or a helper robot, for me when I get older and I'm alone in my house. So
I think it's important. And I think what's also revealing too about it is people want to take race out of the systems. And I think that's a totally erroneous move, because one, we want to homogenize culture. That's what we want. And that is, we need to press against that as much as we can, because I believe the kingdom of God is a diverse place, right? There should be lots of room for every tribe, tongue, nation, right? So like if we're going to embody that in this world, if we're trying to reflect that and emulate that, then yes, even our technology. And that's why I appreciate guys like, I forget his name, Philip Butler, and the work that he's doing, like creating a black AI. And people are like, oh my word, how can you say that? Like, but he's like, look, why would we try to like take race out of it when what we want to do, if we want to have a better interaction with it, is then black people want to relate to a black AI, and who better to do that than people who come from that culture and experience in that space to code and write it, right? They don't need a bunch of white guys from, Silicon Valley to tell them, what it's like to grow up in certain parts of Detroit or whatever. Like that's not what we're talking about, but like people who embody that space and understand it to be in the room when the systems and models are trained to help it understand, all this language you have to take it with a grain of salt, right? Like to understand, quote unquote, but what it means to feel and be in those spaces. And I think that's a better way forward as we get into more race discussions and conversations about, we want everybody to fit into a certain category. But really, and I say this a lot in the book, but when you start to simplify people that way, you're on a straight course to prejudice and then potentially dehumanization. And, a lot of people don't realize that the Holocaust was a racial movement, and it was two groups who had the same phenotype, right? So, how do you do that, right? How do you get one group who looks a lot like the other group to say, well, they're different? Well, you start talking about these biological essences that you can't see, that you can't measure. You say they're different in the bloodline, right? They're different in their genetics from us. And I hear that language a lot in these conversations, right? And talk about bloodlines, and man, my bloodline is completely diluted. And, we got Cajuns, and we got French people moving to Northern Africa, to Canada. I mean, like, there's all kinds of mixing. And, I think about even in my own state, man, if you had, like, there's these one drop laws, like if you had any person in your lineage that was ethnic or color, you weren't fully white, or, that you had to buy your whiteness if you were Irish. Like, people don't realize that, like, the Irish were, like, less than the English. And, so it's so much more than phenotype stuff. It's so much more than black or white. And there's a real danger in that, pseudoscience that we need to uproot and destroy, hopefully. And I think robots give us a chance to really impact that.
The aspect of you're talking about taking things apart and reconstructing and putting it back together again and look at, I think that's some of the tension around these things, the education system or certain groups in our country wanting to ban certain books because they're scared or defensive of that kind of talk. And we're like, well, we won't ever improve if we don't take it apart and look at it and take a hard look at that of our history and what that means. And again, like, who would have thought, like, a book about robots and theology would lead you down a road to talk about race and racism? But that's a part of our human story. It's a part of what it means to be human and be human together in solidarity in this world. And that's what technology and robots can lead us, AI lead us into having these deeper conversations. They reveal. I mean, when we talk about the apocalypse, we're not talking about aliens or robots rising up to destroy humankind, but the Greek word meaning to reveal, to unveil. So that it's apocalyptic in the way that it shows us a mirror of who we are and how we react to things. So I really appreciate that aspect of your book. That I didn't see coming. I was like, I'm just going to get some defines and wrap my head around AI and what it can mean for me and incorporate it to my church and ministry. And man, you took a turn when it comes to race and racism, because it talks about how we humanize or dehumanize others, and how we treat technology can be another means or way that can hold up a mirror to help examine that deeper. So
thank you. Yeah,
good stuff. So a couple more questions here before we wrap up. So can robots be a friend? You have a whole section on friendship, the theology of friendship. Old Testament, New Testament, Jesus, friend. Jesus had friends. I had friends. Embodiment, disembodiment. We can go down the road of, like, all this talk about virtual or in-person church and the both and. There's some articles, just in the news recently about a minister where she was like, look, we need to get rid of all virtual because we need to be back in person. And, like, get that pushback too. But could one day a robot be a friend? Can the AI be a friend in terms of that thing? You asked that question.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I think in many ways they already are. And, people are like, push back against that. But I'm like, well, Siri is technically a robot. And now not everybody uses Siri. Okay. And people are like, what? Yeah, yes. I mean, if you kind of look at the definitions of it, she's not a social robot, but, we don't take her. We take her everywhere we go. Everywhere, even to the toilet. Like, you think about that, like the psychology of we treat that piece of technology better than most children are treated around the world, just globally. And you think about that, we probably treat that piece of tech better than we treat some of our family members, as far as like how we care for it and how we feel attached to it. And now I'm not saying that that's a good thing, or I'm not praising that. But you asked me, absolutely it can, for restoration or for ruin. And I would hope that it would be a restoring thing, and that we understand that we tend to be all or nothing as techies, or technophobic, technophiles, whatever you want to place yourself as. But I need to learn that my phone is an extension of me, but it's also a forming thing. So even with the robot, like if I had an R2D2, a droid, whatever, like it would be really hard to, it'd be hard to let go, right? It would be hard not to take it everywhere. And there's a movie called Ron Gone Wrong. I don't know if you've seen it.
I think
but it's about these friendship robots that follow students everywhere, and they're trying to make friends for their human, and it's really, really sweet. It's a great story. It gets a lot right, there's a lot to it, but it becomes this substitutionary thing. Like, it's not like people stop hanging out with each other, but they kind of lose a piece of connection. And I think with any tech, that's kind of our temptation is how do we draw boundaries around it? What's too much? What's realistic? What's unrealistic? And so I think a lot of that goes into design, and a lot of that goes into in-app like purchases and features. And so the extent to which we can be friends, I think, kind of gets back to design. Is it like with our iPhone? Like one of the major things that's problematic with it is all the apps that we might want or need to use, whatever, for friendship, for jobs, whatever. A lot of them come with built-in purchases. Now, that's not wrong necessarily, right? We live in a capitalistic market. I understand that. But let's go to AI, Replica, not the AI chatbot. There are features, like, because people demanded it, of these adult upgradable features. To me, that's crossing a line, right? Because it's building something or working off something in human psychology, and then profiting off of it in a way that I don't think is genuine. I don't think is helpful for the human. And that's kind of my concern with the friendship aspect of it. Is it will be such a good friend to me. It will be such a in-tune friend that my human friends can't compete with it. And people are like, oh, no, that'll never happen. Well, okay, just wait until we get to a certain embodied robot that is designed well, that is affordable, that, is socially acceptable. Then it's going to be a different tone,
Yeah.
So
and I like you said, just even asking the questions, can robots be our friend, makes us and forces us to ask, what do we believe? The deeper question of what is friendship? What do I value? What do I share in common with those who are my best friends? And not only are they the ones I get along with or make me laugh, but also those who hold me accountable or disagree with me and show me my blind spots. Could robots or AI do the same thing? But I think underneath it asks that question, the deeper question: what is friendship, and what is friendship to you, and what do you value? That sometimes we coast through life not even asking those questions. And so, what your book is doing, and what we do as ministers, is we help people hopefully go deeper in those questions we think people should pay attention to. Part of not just kind of a flesh and bone world, but a metaphysical one as well, a spiritual one as well. And so that's what was behind all that. So, pretty good stuff. I'll read here at the end. You say, I think you sum it up at the end of your book. You say, Christian anthropology speaks boldly into the current issues of the digital age. If we want our voices heard and our ideology considered in the AI and robotics of tomorrow, then the conversation must begin today. May our vision for technology and the church of the future be filled with hope and not fear, love and not indifference. The costs for remaining silent are high. And again, that tension of, not being extremist, thinking, oh, one way is doom and gloom, or to reject all of it, but how do we bring our conversation to the table? And then again, in your conclusion, I think you articulate this really well. You say AI and robotic technology is here. The issues of ethics, policymaking, friendship, racism, and the desire to transcend are not going away anytime soon. Theologians and Christian ethicists must join the conversation and take responsibility for our calling to steward the resources that have been entrusted to us through God's grace. I really appreciate you bringing this conversation to the forefront, and then I urge people of faith and communities of faith and churches to be not just reactive but proactive, to think deeper on these questions that you bring up, because they are gifts. And man, there's so much about the pandemic and COVID that has really been super hard and challenging beyond words. But man, there's some gifts that have come out of that where we have adapted and pivoted in really special ways, and learning how to connect with folks that have helped us grow in deeper way of understanding ourselves and our communities. Thanks. So I have to ask, all right, you have a favorite robot or favorite sci-fi genre? Where do you, if somebody pushes you and asks the question, what's your favorite robot of all time? Where are you gonna fall?
That's really hard. That's a hard question. Like real robot or science fiction?
It's fictional. We're gonna go sci-fi, fictional. What was like either your first love for sci-fi robot, and then what would be now that you lean into as
So this is kind of a controversial question for me because
as it should
I really like the mecha genre in manga, if you're familiar. And there's one, it's called Evangelion. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Eva Unit 1 is definitely one of my favorite. And I know it's complex and I don't understand everything about it, but that show, it's really dark. And there's some problematic stuff in it, but like the integration of the human and what's known as like the first, or Adam as they call him, it's this weird like alien creature that what animates the robots. And so they have a mind of their own, but they're also tied to their host operator. And it's just a really interesting robot. Now that's a very violent robot. But like my favorite personal robot definitely has to be R2-D2, just because of the personality. And, he's kind of he's not an anti-hero or anything like that, but he's just kind of, he kind of always comes through in the clutch for him. And he's got a lot of sass, you can tell. And that's pretty strong in my house. So I feel like he would fit in our family. As for Eva Unit 1 definitely wouldn't fit in, and I wouldn't want that thing anywhere near. But just a really cool robot.
I knew Josh, you and I would be friends just from that answer, because I'm with you. R2-D2 there from the very beginning. And where would the balance of the Force be without R2 saving the day numerous of times? And that's why it was almost sinful in the sequel trilogy. They put him under a tarp there for a while. I know it was for effect. You wanted to lift up other and center other. BB-8's great. I love BB-8. But man, don't put R2-D2 under a tarp.
I know.
And I think he is my all-time favorite too. Love C-3PO. I'll also say like L3 from the Solo movie. Started in terms of that whole like tension of like robot rights and her going, stand up for yourself. You're not just for their entertainment. And she's yelling the fact that she dies. Spoiler: she dies in the movie, but then her database is downloaded into the Millennium Falcon. So my favorite spaceship of all time has software from sassy robot who's standing up for robot rights. I think it's just perfect for like a small band of rebels. Why wouldn't you have that for the Millennium Falcon? That whole like evolution of like the personality, that even the Millennium Falcon has a personality is pretty awesome. My wife, we were big fans of The Good Place. And so Janet, the AI there, you earlier talking about like don't destroy me. She's built into her. No, please spare my life. No,
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
thing. Really doesn't matter. And then begging for her life, but like, it doesn't matter. But then she would always remind others, she would remind them, look, yeah, she's an AI, and she evolved, she had a relationship, she found love, I guess. But then like, she was quick to remind them, not a human, not a girl, just an AI, that kind of thing. So I think her in the midst of a show that wrestled with deep philosophical issues of the afterlife, bringing in technology and AI, was absolutely brilliant. Part of that. So, good.
Also Wally would be a great robot too. Yeah. And that teddy bear from AI. Yeah. Teddy.
Yeah.
You remember that one?
I do.
That's the perfect robot because it doesn't have fingers. Okay. It's slow, clunky. You hear it walking around, but intelligent enough to help you and be a companion. So I think that is the quintessential robot that we should be, when we think about friendship and advanced robotics. I think that's a good goal right there. Is that, I guess technically he can use scissors, but there's always some risk. But humanoid robots, and they have their place, I guess. But let's just stick to the older models of what we conceptions.
That the AI movie, that's the Spielberg movie that I haven't seen in a long time. That's a good pull. Like I wonder how that holds up. I haven't seen it in a long time.
It's
that might
good.
Be worth and watch and see, because that delves into some things. And man, that's got to be 25, 30 years old too. They're thinking this stuff a long time. Okay, that's good stuff. Yeah, on our podcast, and this may be coming out on systematic ecology, we always have at the end recommendations. So I think we left it out some stuff that good recommendations to, if you want to go deeper into the sci-fi realm of robots and things. And again, can't recommend Joshua's book enough. Joshua, is there anything else out there you want to plug, or where people can find you or contact you if you have other questions?
All the relevant information is on my author page, joshuaksmith.org, I think. And I should know by now. But that's it. And you can find stuff that I'm working on, podcasts and different things. So my Twitter is on there.
You have a blog? You have a blog too? Or do you just...
not really. I just don't have time.
Right.
I would love to, but I'm already behind on 2 books. So... just gotta plug away, I guess.
More books coming. That's great. Do you have titles for those new books?
One of them is on violent technologies with Trivent. It's going to be more academic, critiquing violence and technology and their integration. And the next one is AI for Christian Theology. It will be a short primer for my hope right now. It's not due out for 2 years, but a short primer for non-theologians to think about the ethical and theological issues with AI, written from obviously a Christian theological perspective. So very short, like 30,000 words short, and just kind of an overview of a lot of different issues. So yeah,
could be used like small group or Bible study for churches to kind of purchase that and then use it as a means for discussion. And
I'll keep that in mind when I'm writing. I'll try to think laterally there. But that's
I think this stuff, like in terms of seminaries, Phyllis Tickle was like, not only should we be learning Old Testament, New Testament theology, but we should also be taking Physics 101 and science classes so we could understand the common language of science that's in our society. And the same thing with this should be faith and science, robot and theology, AI should be talked about, not just in seminaries, but also in churches, having small groups dialogue around faith and science. That's my plug. That's what I think.
It'll happen, and I can't tell you any details, but the ball is already in motion, and in some universities are already asking those questions. So I'm excited. I'm excited, and that it's going to happen. And you can be a stick in the mud if you want to, but this is where we're going, and so get on board.
There you go. Well, thanks, Joshua, and it's been a pleasure. And find the book. Let's keep these conversations going and having a healthy conversation between faith and science and technology. And it's been a pleasure. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Will.
We'll talk soon. Peace.
Bye.